I walked into that gala thinking I was supporting my husband, only to find my name card waiting for me. Pathetic gold digger nobody. And when I looked up, my husband and my own sister, his boss, were laughing. They wanted everyone to see me as worthless, but they forgot one thing. I know things about them no one else does, and with just 5 whispered words, I lit the fuse that would burn their empire to the ground in 7 days. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. I read every one. When Corbin and I walked into the ballroom, my hands were already clammy. The air smelled of perfume, wine, and ambition, and the low hum of executives making small talk set my teeth on edge. The chandeliers threw light across the polished floors, the kind of brightness that makes you feel like every flaw is on display. I told myself to keep my shoulders straight, chin up. Tonight was supposed to be my chance to fit in, to feel like I belonged in Corbin's world, not just as an accessory, but as his equal. I'd spent the afternoon carefully preparing. My dress was elegant, but understated. Deep navy, the kind of color that whispers rather than shouts. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd blend in with the wives of men who spoke in boardroom jargon and laughed about golf trips to Pebble Beach. Corbin hadn't said much on the way here, just a quick, "Try to relax, Marjorie." As if it was that simple. I followed him to our table, scanning the room. That's when I saw it. My name card, not Marjorie Langford, not Mrs. Corbin Langford. In bold letters, for the whole table to see, pathetic gold digger nobody. At first I thought it had to be a mistake, some intern trying to be funny, a terrible mix-up. My hand froze above the chair. I could feel my pulse in my ears. Then I heard it. Laughter. Not the polite kind, the sharp, knowing kind. I turned my head, and there they were. Corbin, my husband, with his arm draped casually over the back of his chair. And Celine, my older sister. My sister, who also happened to be his boss. Their faces were lit up with amusement, like they were watching a comedy sketch. Celine leaned forward just enough for her words to reach me. "Now they all know who you really are." Her voice dripped with satisfaction. I wanted to scream, to throw the name card in her face, to walk out and let the doors slam behind me. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled. A small, polite, controlled smile. I slid the card off the table and tucked it into my clutch. My hand shook, but I forced myself to sit down. The room seemed to close in on me. I could feel the glances, hear the soft snickers. I caught a woman at the next table whispering something to her husband. He looked at me with that same smirk I'd seen on the faces of mean girls in high school. The kind that says, "We know the joke, and you're it." I wanted to disappear, but I didn't. I'd given up my career, my independence, the life I'd built for myself to stand beside Corbin in his climb up the corporate ladder. And here I was, humiliated like a prop in their little game. Every choice I'd made to support them suddenly felt like a weapon they were now using against me. Celine laughed again, louder this time, as if daring me to react. "Lighten up, Marjorie. It's just a joke," she said, her eyes sparkling with something far meaner than humor. But I didn't give her the satisfaction. I sipped my wine, set the glass down with deliberate care, and let their words wash over me. I kept my breathing steady. I didn't speak, because silence can cut deeper than shouting when wielded properly. The rest of the night blurred into polite chatter, clinking glasses, and the occasional lingering glance in my direction. I kept my smile, a mask so perfect that no one could see the storm raging underneath. But I didn't leave. As I scanned the room, my gaze landed on the CEO at the far end of the ballroom. His presence was commanding, the kind of man everyone naturally gravitated toward. He caught my eye briefly, just long enough for me to know this wasn't over. They thought they had humiliated me. They thought I'd play the part of the quiet, broken wife. They had no idea what I was about to do, and that's when the first memory hit me. How I gave up everything for them, and how it all began. It feels strange looking back now. I can still see myself in that little apartment in Oakland, sunlight streaming through the blinds on a late afternoon. I had been on the phone with my boss, turning down the promotion I'd been working toward for nearly 3 years. "Are you sure, Marjorie?" he asked. "This is a big step up." My throat felt tight, but I forced out, "Yes, I'm sure. My family needs me right now." I told myself it was temporary, that walking away from a promising career as a project manager at the tech firm was just a pause. But even then, deep down, I think I knew. Corbin had been pacing in the kitchen while I ended the call, his face lighting up when I hung up. "You won't regret this," he said, kissing my forehead. "It's our future, Marge. We'll both rise together." His words sounded like a promise, and at the time I wanted so badly to believe him. It wasn't just the promotion I walked away from. I sold my condo, my first real accomplishment, the one thing that was truly mine, to help fund his MBA program and pay off some of the debts we were carrying. "We'll rebuild together," he told me, and I nodded, convincing myself this was what marriage meant. Partnership. Sacrifice. I kept repeating that word in my head like a prayer. Partnership. Celine chimed in too. My sister, who already had her claws deep in the corporate world Corbin worshipped. "Stick with me, sis," she said one evening over wine. "This family wins together." There was always that polished, commanding tone in her voice. I thought she was pulling me in, bringing me closer to something bigger. I didn't realize then that what she meant by family didn't actually include me. In the beginning, the little cuts didn't sting so much. Corbin would shrug off my suggestions about his networking events. "You wouldn't get it," he'd say with that smug half-smile. At family dinners, Celine would hand me tasks like I was her assistant. "Marjorie, can you grab more drinks? Oh, and clean up the plates." I told myself it was just how she was, bossy, commanding, but I'd catch her eyes flicking over me like I didn't quite measure up. And then there was that barbecue, the one that stays with me like a splinter under my skin. I had stepped onto the patio carrying a plate of food when I heard Celine's voice, sharp, cutting, float across the yard. "She's lucky you even married her. Don't let her forget where she came from." I froze. Corbin chuckled in response. He didn't defend me. He didn't correct her. He just let it sit there like truth. I told myself then that I'd misheard, that they didn't mean it the way it sounded. I brushed it off, like I always did. That was my role. The one who didn't stir up conflict, the one who kept things moving smoothly. But standing in that ballroom now, with my name printed like a joke for the world to see, I understood. Those moments weren't harmless. They were rehearsals. Preparations for the night they decided to humiliate me publicly. I let my gaze drift back to them at the table. Corbin, basking in the glow of his own importance. Celine, with that satisfied smirk, like a cat that had cornered its prey. They think I'm still that naive girl. The one who sold her condo, gave up her career, scrubbed their plates and stayed silent when she was insulted. They think I haven't learned. They think I don't see them for what they are. But they're wrong. Because every insult, every little dismissal, every smirk has taught me something. How to stay quiet until the right moment. How to watch. How to collect every little piece of information they'd rather I didn't have. And as I stared at their smug faces, I knew one thing. This was no longer about survival. It was about justice. But justice doesn't start in ballrooms. It starts with the truth. And I had plenty of it. It was almost midnight when I finally exhaled and set my phone down, letting the silence of my apartment wrap around me. I'd been back from the gala for hours, but I still hadn't taken off my heels or the diamond studs Corbin insisted I wear. I sat at my small kitchen table, its wood scuffed from years of use, surrounded by piles of old documents I'd pulled from a locked box in the closet. Contracts, emails, bank transfers, pages that told a story no one had bothered to read. Until now. My fingers traced the faded ink on one contract, the one that connected me to Celine's company back when it was nothing more than a desperate startup operating out of a rented office space. Back then, Celine called me her right hand. I handled the logistics for her first product launch, worked weekends drafting investor proposals, even called in favors from my contacts in tech to get her meetings she couldn't have landed on her own, all unpaid. "We're building something big, Marge," she told me, her voice sugary and persuasive. "When this takes off, you'll be family in every sense, blood and business." Family. I let that word blind me. I sifted through the emails, the ones where I'd sent her detailed plans, cost analyses, and potential leads, work I should have been paid for. At the time, I didn't care about the money. I cared about proving I belonged, about showing Corbin and Celine I was more than the tag-along little sister with a modest job. I thought if I gave enough, sacrificed enough, they'd see me as an equal. Then I found it. The email I'd read years ago and dismissed because I couldn't face what it meant. An email from Celine to their attorney, dated just a few weeks before the company filed its incorporation documents. Remove Marjorie's name from all partnership agreements. She's family. She won't need a stake. My stomach clenched as I read it again, slower this time, forcing each word to sink in. It wasn't an oversight. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was intentional. Celine hadn't just overlooked me. She'd erased me. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling as if the cheap plaster could absorb my anger. How many times had I brushed off that gnawing feeling in my gut? The one that whispered something wasn't right. I'd let Corbin gaslight me every time I asked about the company's finances. "You don't need to worry about that stuff," he'd say, his tone dripping with condescension. "Focus on us, on our future." And like a fool, I did. Even my memories of those conversations felt manipulative now. Celine patting my hand with that fake sisterly warmth. "You're so good at supporting us, Marge. That's what keeps this family strong." Corbin smiling over dinner, assuring me, "Once this all pays off, you'll get everything you deserve." Those weren't reassurances, they were distractions. They kept me quiet while they built their empire on my back. I closed the folder of contracts and just sat there for a moment, letting the weight of it all settle on me. They didn't just take me for granted. They didn't just humiliate me in front of a ballroom of strangers. They erased me. The anger felt different now. It wasn't the hot, dizzying kind that makes you want to scream. It was cold, focused, sharp. I finally understood that I couldn't fight them by begging for respect or recognition. They thrived on my silence, my compliance, my desperate need to belong. I pushed the documents into a neat stack, then tucked them back into their box. This wasn't the night to use them. Not yet. I wasn't going to storm into Celine's office or confront Corbin in a fit of tears. No, if they wanted a naive little sister who kept her mouth shut, I'd give them that, just long enough to watch them trip over their own arrogance. You don't survive in a den of wolves by crying. You survive by becoming the hunter. And that's when I knew. My silence had been their weapon. Now, it would be my armor. On the first move, let them think I was still broken. I woke up to sunlight spilling across my bedroom floor, but the light felt fake, like everything else in my life. I reached for my phone before I even got out of bed. Predictably, Corbin had texted sometime after midnight. "Hope you've calmed down. That scene you caused at the gala? Not a good look, Marge." Calmed down. That was what he always said when he wanted me quiet. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I typed exactly what he wanted to hear. "You're right. I overreacted. I'm sorry for embarrassing you." I stared at the words, hating them, hating myself for sending them. But this wasn't about my pride anymore. This was about letting him believe I was still the docile wife who folded at his disapproval. His reply came quickly. "Good, let's not make things worse. Just stay out of Celine's way for now. She's under a lot of pressure." So there it was. They'd written me off. Again. And I was going to let them. By mid-morning, I'd managed to pull myself together enough to play the role. Messy bun, no makeup, oversized sweater, the perfect picture of a humiliated woman licking her wounds. It was intentional. If Corbin stopped by unexpectedly or Celine heard anything about me through their little corporate grapevine, I wanted them to see a nobody, just like they labeled me. But that afternoon, I traded the sweater for a tailored coat and headed downtown. My heart thudded as I stepped into a quiet cafe tucked between two office buildings, a place where no one would expect to see me. Thomas was already there, sitting in the back corner, nursing a black coffee. He looked older than I remembered, a little more lined around the eyes, but his presence was steady. He stood as I approached. "Marjorie," he said warmly, pulling me into a brief hug. "It's been a long time." "Too long," I replied, sliding into the booth across from him. Thomas used to be close to our family before Celine's empire consumed everything. He'd been one of the first attorneys she worked with when her company was just an idea. Back then, he treated me like I mattered, something I hadn't forgotten. We exchanged pleasantries, but there wasn't time for small talk. I leaned in, lowering my voice. "Thomas, I need help, and I need you to keep this between us." He studied me for a moment. "If this is about Celine, you're not the first person to come to me with complaints, but your family, that makes it complicated." "I was family," I corrected. "Now I'm just a tool they used until I outlived my usefulness." That caught his attention. I told him just enough. How I'd contributed to Celine's company in its early stages, how my name disappeared from contracts without my knowledge. I didn't show him everything yet. That would come later. He leaned back, sighing. If what you're saying is true, Marjorie, it's more than unethical. Depending on the agreements, it might even be illegal. You could have a strong claim. The words landed like a spark in my chest. Illegal. It wasn't just betrayal. It was actionable. And there's more, Thomas continued, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. There are people inside Celine's company who don't like her. Ruthless leaders make enemies, and she's made plenty. If we find the right person, someone might be willing to help from the inside. I nodded, letting the information settle. An ally on the inside? That could be the key to tearing their whole facade apart. As we left the cafe, the air felt different, colder, sharper, like the world itself was pushing me forward. I wasn't the pathetic gold digger nobody Celine made me out to be, not anymore. If they wanted a nobody, I'd be their nobody, until the day they never saw me coming. But wolves don't just hunt alone, they leave traps. That became my mantra as I stood in front of my bathroom mirror that morning, hair perfectly styled, makeup carefully done, but subtle. If Celine saw me, or more importantly, if she heard about me, I wanted her to think I was groveling, desperate to make amends. Wolves never expect the sheep to bare their teeth. No more outbursts, I told my reflection. No more begging, only precision. I spent the late morning at my kitchen table, scribbling notes on a legal pad, timelines, names, connections. Then I slipped the pad into my bag, grabbed my keys, and drove to one of Celine's favorite luxury boutiques. Just walking in made my stomach churn. She'd brought me here once before, years ago, with that sickly sweet tone, "Let me help you pick something that doesn't scream cheap." The same clerk from that day, a thin woman with a fixed smile, was behind the counter. She recognized me instantly, which was perfect. "Mrs. Vaughn," she said, voice dripping with politeness that didn't reach her eyes. "We haven't seen you in a while." I forced a nervous laugh. "I know, I'm trying to make peace. Things got tense with Celine after the gala. I thought maybe I could find her something as a, apology gift." I lowered my voice conspiratorially, like I was sharing a secret. A grand gesture. I knew how gossip worked in these circles. I didn't need to buy a thing. I just needed to leave enough breadcrumbs. The clerk leaned in slightly. "Ms. Celine always appreciates thoughtful gifts. If you'd like, I can set aside a few of her favorites." "That would be wonderful," I said, masking my disgust with gratitude. As I browsed aimlessly, feigning indecision, a young woman in a sharp black blazer approached me. She looked too nervous to be a salesperson. Her eyes darted to the clerk, then back to me. She slipped a folded piece of paper into my hand without a word. I raised an eyebrow, but she walked away briskly. I waited until I was in my car to open it. Inside was a single sentence, scrawled in hurried handwriting. "I know what Celine did to you. Call me Ivy." I stared at the number below it, my pulse quickening. Ivy, Celine's assistant. That night, I called her from a burner phone I'd picked up on my way home. Her voice trembled at first, but grew steadier as she spoke. "I've been working for her for 2 years. I've seen what she does to people. Employees, family, anyone who gets in her way. I can't do it anymore." "What do you want?" I asked bluntly. "Money," she said without hesitation. "And protection if this blows up. In exchange, I can get you proof, emails, expense reports, things that would destroy her if they went public." I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of her words settle. "Go on." "Celine's been embezzling," Ivy continued. "She uses company funds for personal executive retreats, fake invoices, lavish trips billed as business expenses. I've seen it all." After I hung up, I called Thomas. He didn't even try to hide his shock. "Marjorie, if that's true, this isn't just a family squabble. That's criminal. If this gets to the board, Celine's finished." By midnight, I had the first batch of documents in my inbox, PDFs Ivy had pulled from Celine's files. They were meticulous, every lie documented with dates and signatures. And then I set my trap. I sent an anonymous tip with copies of the documents to a journalist Thomas trusted. I didn't sign my name. I didn't leave a trace. I let the fire start quietly, smoldering in places Celine wouldn't notice until it was too late. By the time they smelled smoke, the fire would already be inside their house. And the first spark came from someone they never saw coming. It was almost amusing how fast the rumors spread. By Tuesday morning, whispers about Celine's executive retreats were circling the upper floors of her company. I didn't need confirmation. I could feel it in her emails to Corbin, clipped sentences, sharp-edged politeness, the kind that meant she was unraveling. But I stayed quiet. I kept playing the role. The subdued, apologetic wife who'd embarrassed herself at the gala and was too busy licking her wounds to notice anything else. When Corbin left for work that morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, scrolling through the company's online forums under a burner profile. Employees were speculating. One anonymous post read, "If this blows up, the board will tear her apart." I smiled to myself and closed the laptop. Chaos was brewing, but I needed to stay still. Let her believe I was oblivious. By mid-afternoon, I found myself walking into Celine's glass-walled office for a prep meeting Corbin insisted I attend. "It'll look good if you show support," he'd said. What he really meant was, "Don't make me look bad by hiding." Celine didn't look up when I entered. "Oh," she said flatly, "Marjorie's here." Her tone dripped with feigned surprise. Around the table, a few of her executives exchanged amused glances. I took a seat quietly at the end, gripping the edge of the chair to keep my composure. "Since you're here," Celine continued, finally lifting her gaze to me, "try to follow along. This isn't dinner party talk, it's business." Laughter rippled lightly across the room. Someone muttered, "Poor thing probably thinks this is about centerpieces." I forced a smile, my nails digging into my palm under the table. It was the gala all over again, her little stage, her audience, and me as the punchline. After the meeting, she brushed past me near the elevator, leaning in just enough to say, "You're wasting everyone's time playing house in my world. Go back to being Corbin's shadow. It suits you." Then she walked away like I didn't exist. I went home with those words echoing in my head. But instead of breaking me, they hardened something inside. That night, as I was rinsing dishes, my phone buzzed. "Thomas." "Marjorie." His voice was low, urgent. "You've poked a viper. She's panicking and looking for someone to crush. She's having your finances pulled apart. Bank statements, credit history, everything. She's digging for dirt." I leaned against the counter, letting the cold, deliberate anger take over. "Let her dig," I said calmly. "Marge, I'm serious. She wants to destroy you before anything reaches the board." I stayed silent for a long moment, then asked, "Thomas, what do you think scares her more? Being exposed or not knowing who's holding the knife?" He sighed. "Don't get reckless." "I'm not reckless," I said. "I'm precise." After we hung up, I opened my laptop and created a burner email account. I typed out a single line. "You've made a mistake. Watch the board." No name, no signature. I sent it directly to her corporate inbox. It wasn't about giving her answers. It was about taking away her sense of control, making her wonder who else knew, how deep it went, how close her empire was to crumbling. If she wanted a war of reputation, I'd fight her with the truth. But not all at once. I'd let her twist in her own paranoia, make her second-guess everyone around her until she unraveled completely. By morning, Celine wasn't just my sister anymore. She was my prey, and predators, when cornered, always bare their teeth. It started with a call from Corbin. His voice was falsely casual, that tone he used when he was delivering Celine's orders. "Celine wants to see you," he said. "Her office. Today." No explanation. No invitation to negotiate. By late morning, I stood outside her corner office. The floor-to-ceiling windows gave a sweeping view of the city, like she was perched on a throne surveying her kingdom. Her assistant gave me the once-over before opening the door. Celine didn't look up. "Marjorie," she said flatly, her eyes fixed on her screen. "Close the door." I obeyed, my heels sinking into the plush carpet as I approached her desk. I stayed standing. She let the silence stretch, a predator savoring the moment before pouncing. Finally, she looked up, and the sweetness she used to feign was gone. "You've been busy," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Or at least you think you have." I kept my face neutral. I'm not sure what you mean. Her laugh was sharp, humorless. Don't play dumb. That little scene at the gala? Cute. The whispers in the company? Amateur. But I know you, Marjorie. You've always been desperate for attention you don't deserve. She stood and walked toward me, closing the distance. You think you can play in my world? I built this empire. Every contract, every dollar, every executive in that building bends to me. And you? You're just Corbin's charity case. A girl I let sit at my table out of pity. My nails dug into my palm, but I didn't flinch. She circled me slowly. I've been looking into you, she continued. Your accounts, your spending, even some of those cute little favors you did for my company years ago. You don't really want me to drag those skeletons out, do you? Because if I do, no one's going to see you as the victim you so badly want to be. There it was. The mask was gone. I turned to face her fully, forcing myself to stay calm. Is this where I'm supposed to beg? I asked. She smirked. If you're smart. I stepped closer, close enough to smell her perfume. Sharp, expensive, suffocating. Funny thing about empires, Celine, I said evenly. They don't fall because of strangers. They collapse from the inside. It's always the ones at the table who bring them down. For the first time, she hesitated. It was small, the faintest twitch in her jaw, her eyes darting briefly to the side. But I caught it. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice so only she could hear. And you know better than anyone that the board doesn't forgive thieves. Her face paled, just for a second. The air between us crackled. She was trying to read me, to figure out how much I knew, how deep I'd dug. She didn't find answers. That was the point. I stepped back and smoothed my coat like we'd just had a pleasant chat. Thank you for the meeting, I said, my voice polite, controlled. I'll see myself out. Celine didn't say a word as I left, but I didn't need her to. I'd seen the crack. By the time I walked out of that building, I wasn't shaking anymore. I was electric. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the city lights from my window. For years, she had fed off my silence, mistaking it for weakness. But now my silence wasn't submission. It was strategy. Every word I'd spoken, every glance I'd given her, had been deliberate, a quiet reminder that she wasn't untouchable. And the moment she realized that was the moment she knew she'd already lost. But losing quietly was never Celine's style. 7 days after the gala, I walked into the boardroom, my heels clicking against the polished floor. The room hummed with tension, executives murmuring, papers shuffling, the faint clinking of coffee cups. The air smelled of sharp cologne and expensive leather. At the head of the table sat the CEO, his expression unreadable. To his left, Celine, and next to her Corbin, wearing a mask of forced confidence that didn't fool anyone. I took my seat near the end of the table, deliberately unassuming. A few people glanced at me, some with curiosity, others with pity. None of that mattered. I wasn't here for their approval, I was here for the fallout. The CEO cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming on short notice. Before we begin, I'd like to address a matter brought to our attention last week. His gaze flicked to Celine, who shifted uncomfortably in her chair. An internal audit has uncovered several irregularities. Funds misappropriated under the guise of executive retreats, personal expenses categorized as corporate initiatives. In short, embezzlement. The word hung in the air like a guillotine. Celine jumped in, her voice sharp and defensive. This is absurd. These retreats were strategic. Investments in our company's growth. Anyone who says otherwise doesn't understand how business works. The CEO didn't blink. We've reviewed the receipts, Celine. You billed the company for personal vacations. And Corbin, he turned, his tone ice cold. You authorized transfers to accounts that do not belong to the corporation. Corbin's face drained of color. That's a misunderstanding. Celine told me. Celine cut him off. Don't drag me into your incompetence. I stayed silent, watching the cracks widen. Finally, Celine turned to me, her face contorted with venom. This is your doing, she spat. You've been poisoning people against me since the gala. You're a bitter little girl who can't handle living in my shadow. Tell them, Marjorie. Tell them about your obsession with destroying me. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. I folded my hands on the table and met Celine's glare. You think this is about you? My voice was calm, almost soft. This isn't personal. This is accountability. Celine let out a laugh, shrill, unhinged. Accountability? You're nothing. You've been nothing since the day Corbin married you. You gave up your career to cling to him like a parasite, and now you think you can take me down? I let her rant, let her show them exactly who she was. The CEO finally cut her off. Enough. The audit speaks for itself. He nodded to his assistant, who handed out packets of damning evidence, paper trails, bank statements, email chains. Celine snatched hers, her hands trembling as she flipped through the pages. "This is a setup," she hissed, but even she didn't sound convinced. "Celine," the CEO said coolly, "your actions have put this company at risk. Effective immediately, the board has voted to remove you as acting director." The room erupted in whispers. Celine froze. "And Corbin," the CEO added, "you are suspended pending investigation." Corbin opened his mouth to protest, but no sound came out. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just sat there, silent, as their empire crumbled. For once, their laughter wasn't at me. It was at the two of them. 7 days. That's all it took. 7 days from a whisper in the CEO's ear. Check your accounts. 7 days. To watching their carefully constructed kingdom fall into rubble. Later, back in my apartment, I stared at the city lights. I thought victory would feel like fireworks. Instead, it felt quiet. Heavy. Revenge doesn't heal you. It doesn't erase the years they took from you. But it does remind them, and you, who they underestimated. And when Celine turned to me in that boardroom, eyes blazing, I knew this wasn't over. Not for her, but I wasn't playing for survival anymore. I was playing for freedom. A week after the boardroom felt like a lifetime. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind a strange stillness. I sat at a small cafe near Lake Merritt, the late morning sun glinting off the water just beyond the windows. The air smelled of espresso and fresh pastries, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I wrapped my hands around a warm mug of coffee, letting the heat settle into my palms as I stared out at joggers circling the lake. People were moving on with their lives, unbothered, unburdened. I envied them for a moment. Then I reminded myself, I was becoming one of them, free. Celine was out, Corbin too. The audit results had been brutal, exposing every misappropriated dollar, every fabricated expense report. They were now under investigation, and though I'd stayed mostly out of the follow-up, Thomas kept me updated in quiet phone calls. The empire they had built on arrogance and deceit had collapsed in less than 2 weeks. I reached into my purse and pulled out the name card from the gala. Pathetic gold digger nobody. The black ink was smudged from where my fingers had pressed against it that night, trying to keep my composure. I smoothed it flat on the cafe table and stared at it. I remembered the sting of humiliation, the way their laughter had sliced through me in that ballroom, but I didn't feel that pain anymore. Instead, I smiled. That card told me who they thought I was. It was their definition of me. They couldn't imagine I'd be anything else. Now, I wasn't that woman anymore. I thought back to the quiet conversation I'd had with the CEO after the board meeting. Everyone else had left the room, Celine storming out with Corbin trailing behind her like a shadow. The CEO stayed seated, rifling through papers before finally looking up at me. "You did the right thing," he said simply. "I didn't do it for the company," I admitted. He gave me a knowing nod. "You did it for yourself. That's what integrity looks like. We could use more of it around here." It wasn't flowery or dramatic, but it was the first time in years I felt seen for more than my proximity to Corbin or Celine. For the first time, I wasn't the wife or the sister. I was Marjorie, a woman who had survived betrayal, clawed her way out of humiliation, and found her voice again. I traced the edges of the name card with my thumb. For so long, I had let them define me. I had shrunk myself to fit their world, swallowed my pride, ignored the little humiliations because I thought that's what love and loyalty demanded. But they had taken years from me. Years of my career, my confidence, my peace. And yet, staring out at the rippling water of the lake, I realized they hadn't taken everything. They hadn't taken my future. I folded the name card one last time and stood up. Walking toward the trash bin by the door, I tossed it in without ceremony. The paper made a soft sound as it landed at the bottom, barely noticeable, like the final breath of something long dead. They gave me a name that night. Pathetic, nobody. But I'd given myself a new one. Free. As I walked out of the cafe and into the bright Oakland air, I felt lighter than I had in years. And for the first time in years, I walked away, not from them, but toward myself.